The early morning sun stretched across the sky, casting a soft golden light over the peaceful farm. John, the farmer, stepped out of his modest farmhouse and took a deep breath of the cool morning air. The scent of fresh hay and the distant sound of animals grazing in the field filled his senses. It was the perfect morning for tending to the chores, just like any other day. But today, something unusual was about to happen, something that would change his life forever. As he made his way toward the barn, his attention was drawn to a faint sound coming from the edge of his property. At first, he thought it might have been the wind rustling through the trees, but then it came again, a low whimper. His heart skipped a beat. No one had been out here this early, and the sound definitely wasn't from any of his animals. Curiosity piqued, John walked toward the source of the noise. As he got closer, he spotted a figure crouched near the barn. At first glance, it looked like a large dog, but something seemed off about it. The animal was filthy, its coat matted with dirt and patches of fur missing. It looked as though it had been through hell, its body weak and trembling. John's heart sank as he approached the dog. It was a German shepherd, but it was unlike any dog he had ever seen. The animal's eyes were dull and filled with a sadness that went beyond exhaustion. It had clearly been abandoned, left to fend for itself in the wild. The poor creature seemed to have lost all hope, but there was a faint glimmer of recognition in its gaze, as if it knew someone was finally there to help. Without hesitation, John knelt down and extended his hand toward the dog. The German shepherd flinched at first, but then allowed him to gently pet its head. The dog's bones were clearly visible beneath its thin fur, and its ribs poked out from its side. John could feel the weight of the animal's suffering, but he also felt an overwhelming sense of compassion. He had always been a man who believed in helping those in need, and this dog was no exception. After a moment, John slowly stood up, his decision made. He wasn't going to leave the animal out here to die alone. "Come on, boy," he murmured softly. "Let's get you inside and cleaned up." The dog didn't move at first, but then, almost as if it understood, it staggered to its feet and began to follow him. John helped the animal along, his heart heavy with concern. They made their way back to the farmhouse, where John gently led the dog into the kitchen, the warmth and smell of food offering a stark contrast to the cold, barren land outside. As the dog settled on the kitchen floor, John grabbed a towel and started to clean the dirt and grime from its fur. He carefully checked the dog for injuries and found a few scrapes on its legs, but nothing too serious. The dog winced as he gently treated the wounds, its eyes still holding that same haunted look. John's heart ached for the animal. Who would do something like this? He muttered to himself as he worked. The German shepherd didn't respond, but it gave a soft, almost relieved sigh as the warmth from the fire and the kindness in John's touch began to work their magic. After hours of cleaning and feeding, the dog looked a little better, though still far from healthy. John, exhausted but determined, settled on the idea that he would do whatever it took to nurse the animal back to health. It was clear the dog had a past that it couldn't escape, no matter how far it ran. But John didn't need to know the details of that past to understand one thing: this dog deserved a chance. That night, as John sat by the fire, the German shepherd lay quietly at his feet. He couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just any ordinary dog. There was something about its presence, something about the way it looked at him, that made him wonder if this was truly a chance encounter or something more. The thought lingered in his mind as he drifted off to sleep, unaware that this was only the beginning of an incredible journey that would reveal more than he could ever imagine. For now, though, all he could do was give this poor soul the love and care it so desperately needed, and hope that somehow it would find its way back to happiness again. As the days passed, John became increasingly attached to the German shepherd. The dog, which he had named Rex, slowly regained its strength. Every morning, John would rise early, his routine now revolving around tending to the dog. He would make sure Rex had plenty of food, clean water, and time to rest. Slowly but surely, Rex's coat began to shine again, and the sadness in his eyes softened. But despite the improvements, John couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the dog than met the eye. Rex had settled into his new life on the farm, yet there were moments that made John pause. There were times when the dog would stare out of the window for hours, watching the fields as if waiting for something or someone. Sometimes, Rex would perk up at the slightest noise, his ears alert, and his body tense as if preparing for an attack. John dismissed it at first as signs of trauma, the dog simply reacting to its difficult past. But soon, the behaviors became too frequent to ignore. One evening, after a long day's work, John returned to the farmhouse and found Rex staring out the window again. This time, however, the dog's posture was different. His body was stiff, his eyes scanning the horizon with a sharp focus. John followed Rex's gaze but saw nothing out of the ordinary. The fields were empty, and the sun was just beginning to set, but there was something about the way Rex was watching that unnerved him. "Rex, what is it, boy?" John murmured, walking over to the dog. Rex didn't move, only turning his head slightly to glance at John before resuming his watch. John bent down and gently stroked the dog's fur, but Rex didn't seem to relax. It was as if the dog was expecting something, or someone, just beyond the edge of the field. That night, John found himself unable to sleep. His mind raced with questions. Why did Rex act so strangely? What had happened to him in the past that made him so vigilant, so cautious? It wasn't just the dog's behavior that puzzled John. It was the way Rex seemed to sense things before they happened. The dog could hear distant noises long before John did, and his reactions were often faster than any dog John had ever known. Was it just instinct, or was there something else at play? The next morning, John decided to investigate further. He started by looking through the dog's collar, which he hadn't paid much attention to before. Rex had a thick, worn-out collar, but there was something odd about it. It didn't look like a typical dog collar. There was a small metallic tag hidden under the leather strap. Curious, John carefully pried it loose, revealing a tiny metal chip embedded in the collar. John's heart skipped a beat. The chip wasn't like anything he had ever seen before. It wasn't a typical pet ID tag, but rather something more official. As John examined it, he noticed a series of numbers etched into the small chip. It looked almost like a serial number, a code of some sort. What in the world could it mean? His mind began to race with possibilities. Could Rex have been part of a military program? A police dog, perhaps? But why was he abandoned? Why was he left to wander the fields alone? And why was his collar marked with a strange code? Unable to ignore his growing curiosity, John decided to take Rex to the local veterinarian, hoping that the medical professional might know something about the strange chip. The vet, a kind woman named Dr. Parsons, was just as puzzled as John. She had never seen a collar with such a chip before. "Whatever this is," Dr. Parsons said as she examined the chip, "it's not something I've come across in all my years working with animals. This looks like it was intentionally embedded, like it was meant to track the dog or monitor its activities." The thought sent a chill down John's spine. Had Rex been some sort of government asset? A highly trained dog for a specific mission? The possibilities seemed endless, but they all raised one pressing question. Why had Rex ended up on his farm, abandoned and broken? As John left the vet's office, Rex walked calmly by his side, seemingly unaware of the whirlwind of questions surrounding him. The more John learned, the more it became clear that this was no ordinary dog. Rex had a past, a secret life that was still hidden beneath the surface. And with every passing day, John couldn't help but wonder just how deep this mystery ran. What had Rex been through? And what would happen when the truth finally came to light? Little did John know, the answers to these questions would soon unravel in a way he could never have imagined. The days that followed were a blur of uncertainty and growing intrigue. John found himself constantly thinking about Rex's mysterious past. The dog had settled into his life on the farm, But there was always that nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. Every time Rex would pause and stare at something in the distance, or react to sounds before anyone else could hear them, John couldn't help but wonder, what had this dog been through? One chilly morning, as John walked toward the barn to feed the animals, Rex followed closely behind him, his eyes scanning the horizon as usual. John paused for a moment to check on a few of the cattle, and as he did, Rex's ears perked up, his body tensed, and he let out a low growl. John, sensing that something was wrong, quickly turned to see what had triggered Rex's reaction. In the distance, he saw a figure walking along the tree line, someone who clearly wasn't supposed to be there. Without thinking, John began to walk toward the figure. Rex remained close by his side, his growl deepening as the figure got closer. But as John drew nearer, he realized it was just a neighbor, someone who had come by to discuss some farm business. The tension in the air lifted almost immediately, but Rex's unease didn't fade. The dog continued to stare at the man with suspicion, his body stiff and alert. John noticed that Rex seemed to be on edge, as if something about the man triggered a deep-rooted response in him. "Easy, boy," John said, patting Rex gently on the head. "It's just Hank, nothing to worry about." But Rex didn't relax. Instead, his eyes remained locked on the man, his body poised like a spring, ready to react at any moment. John found himself unsettled by the dog's behavior. Something about Rex's reaction felt too personal, too intense, for a simple stranger. It was as if the dog had known this man before, or perhaps had been trained to react in such a way. That evening, John's curiosity reached a boiling point. He couldn't ignore the nagging feeling any longer. He needed to know the truth about Rex's past, who he was, and what he had been through. Determined, John decided to take matters into his own hands. He returned to the vet's office the next morning, and without wasting any time, asked Dr. Parsons to help him dig deeper into the mystery of the chip embedded in Rex's collar. Dr. Parsons, although initially skeptical, agreed to help John investigate. Together, they managed to get in touch with a contact at a military base, hoping to get more information about the strange identification chip. After a tense phone call, John's world was rocked by a shocking revelation. "It's military," Dr. Parsons explained after hanging up the phone, her voice barely above a whisper. Rex is part of an elite, highly classified military program. He's not just any dog. He's been trained for covert operations." John's heart dropped as he processed the information. His mind raced with questions. How had Rex ended up on his farm? Why had he been abandoned? What kind of operations had this dog been a part of? "The chip," Dr. Parsons continued, "is used to track Special Forces dogs. They're implanted with it for identification, and it helps keep track of their movements during missions. Rex was part of a unit that was trained for high-stakes, top-secret operations. He was a tactical asset, trained in everything from reconnaissance to protection." John's mind was spinning. He never would have guessed that the quiet, seemingly broken dog in his kitchen was once a highly trained military weapon. The more he thought about it, the more questions arose. Why had Rex been discarded? And why had no one come looking for him? As if to answer John's unspoken question, the phone rang, breaking the silence. It was the military contact from earlier, and the tone in the man's voice sent a chill down John's spine. "I'm afraid Rex is part of a program that was shut down," the man explained. "We lost a lot of assets when the program was decommissioned. The dogs that were involved, Rex included, were either put down or reassigned. It's possible that Rex was just forgotten. But make no mistake, he's more than just a dog. He's been through things that would make most people shudder." John sat in stunned silence. The dog he had taken in out of pity, the animal he had grown so fond of, had a history far darker than he could have ever imagined. Rex wasn't just a stray looking for a home. He was a survivor of a life filled with danger and secrecy, a life he had left behind, but could never fully escape. John now understood that the dog he had taken in was more than a victim of abandonment. Rex had a purpose, one that had been ripped away from him. And as the truth of Rex's past began to unravel, John realized that his decision to bring the dog into his home wasn't just an act of kindness. It was the start of something far bigger, a journey into the heart of a secret world that would soon demand to be uncovered. The days following the revelation about Rex's past were filled with a profound sense of uncertainty. John couldn't shake the weight of the truth. Rex was no ordinary dog. He had been part of a covert military program, trained for missions that required more than just obedience and loyalty. He had been a weapon, an asset in a world that most people would never understand. And yet, despite all that, Rex had ended up on John's farm, abandoned and broken. As though all of that history had been erased in an instant, John spent countless hours thinking about Rex's life before he arrived at the farm. What had he been through? What kind of missions had he been sent on? Rex's calm demeanor, his loyalty, and his intelligence, qualities that John had come to admire, suddenly took on a deeper, more poignant meaning. The dog wasn't just a stray. He was a survivor. He had lived through things no living being should ever experience. And yet here he was, standing beside John as if the years of service and pain had never happened. But Rex's past wasn't the only secret that had been hidden. There was more to his story, something John was about to discover that would change everything. One rainy afternoon, as John was feeding the cattle, he noticed Rex standing by the fence, staring intently at the barn. The dog's eyes were fixed on something in the distance, and his body was tense. John approached him slowly, his heart beating in his chest. He had learned by now that when Rex behaved like this, something was about to happen. Rex's instincts were sharper than anything John had ever seen, and there was an eerie sense of certainty in the dog's gaze. "Rex, what is it, boy?" John asked softly, crouching beside the dog. Rex didn't move, but his eyes never left the barn. It was as if he were waiting for something, or someone, to appear. And then, just as John was about to turn away, he heard the faint sound of footsteps crunching in the gravel. It wasn't the soft, familiar step of a neighbor or a family member. No, these were heavy boots, deliberate, almost military in their rhythm. John's heart skipped a beat as he turned his gaze toward the barn, where the figure was now emerging from the shadows. A man, tall and strong, dressed in dark clothing, stepped into view. His face was hidden beneath a hood, but the unmistakable air of authority surrounded him. Rex's growl was low and menacing, but it wasn't directed at the man. It was directed at something else, something much deeper in the past. The man stopped a few feet away from John, and for a long moment, they stood in silence. The rain fell softly around them, but there was a heaviness in the air that made it seem like the entire world was holding its breath. Finally, the man spoke, his voice low but firm. "You found him." John's mind raced. The words hung in the air like a ghost, and he wasn't sure if he was ready to hear the truth. But the man continued. "Rex, he was part of a special unit. He was trained for high-risk missions, missions that no one could know about. We lost track of him when the program ended. But it seems he's found a new purpose." John's eyes flickered to Rex, whose gaze had softened but still held the intensity of a dog who knew something John couldn't yet comprehend. "He's not just a soldier, you know," the man continued, taking a step forward. "Rex was a partner, a friend to the people who worked with him. And when we lost him, we lost something irreplaceable." The man paused for a moment, his eyes lingering on Rex before meeting John's. There was a deep sadness in his expression, as if he, too, felt the weight of Rex's abandonment. "You don't understand," the man said quietly, "but Rex deserves better than this. He deserves a life of peace, a life where he can just be a dog. We can't undo what's been done, but we can give him a chance at a new beginning." John stood frozen, torn between the loyalty he felt to Rex and the gravity of the situation before him. Rex had a past, a life that was far more complex than he could have ever imagined. And now, John had to decide whether to let go of the dog he had come to love or send him back to a world of danger and secrecy, back to a past that had no place in the peaceful life they had begun to build together. Rex, sensing the turmoil, walked over to John and nuzzled his hand, a quiet plea for reassurance. The bond between them, one forged through compassion and care, was undeniable. In that moment, John realized what he had to do. He looked at the man and shook his head. Rex stays. He's found his place here. He's not going back. The man nodded, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. I hoped you'd say that, he said, turning to leave. Just know that Rex was more than you think. He may not remember it now, but he was a hero. He deserves your care. Just promise me you'll protect him. I will, John said firmly, his voice steady. I'll protect him with everything I've got. As the man disappeared into the distance, John looked down at Rex, who was now sitting at his feet, his eyes calm but knowing. There were no more secrets between them. Rex was home. And together, they would face whatever came next. Whatever the future held, it would be their journey, side by side. John bent down and patted Rex's head, his heart swelling with love and gratitude. You're safe now, he whispered, and I'll never let anything harm you again. In that quiet moment, with the rain falling softly around them, the bond between man and dog was complete. They had both found their place in the world, and that was enough.